says okay, currently he is in UN Syarif Hidayatullah, Jakarta. As the first speaker, Ms. Asma, you there? Okay, time is yours.
Hello. Shall I get started?
Yeah, clearly enough.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon for those on the other side of the world. So I'll just share my screen. Okay. I hope you can see the slides over here.
Yeah. Can you make it full screen for? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. It was a very early start here, but I tried to catch as many papers and sessions as I could. It was just amazing listening to all the papers from the speakers. For my own presentation today, it's titled, as you can see on the screen, Decolonizing Narratives on Arab Women's Contribution to Fin de Siècle and Early 20th Century Literature and Culture. Just by way of introduction, I just stopped the video. Okay, so in this talk, I explored the heated debates on social justice among Arab writers regarding women's rights at the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries, and how pioneering Arab women writers' writing and activism were undermined by widespread narratives that credit male reformers and writers for progressive modes of thinking and developments in narrative fiction writing. I also examined Arab women's engagement with discourses of suffrage, nationalism, and Victorian science, and their vision for incorporating those in the Arab world. In addition to this, I outlined some of the challenges I encountered while researching Arab women's contribution to the Nahda movement, or the Arab Renaissance, and their fin de siècle feminism in the Arab world and the diaspora, focusing especially on North America. I focus on the difficulties I faced in relation to determining my methodological frameworks for translating Arabic texts into English, especially narrative fiction and non-fiction pieces in the periodical press, and locating certain sources for my PhD research. Due to the inaccessibility of these sources, especially, but more broadly, I reflect on how my research and recent teaching practice on modules related to Victorian and Middle Eastern studies contribute to and incorporate decolonizing methodologies that can be applied by those who research and teach the long 19th century and Victorian and Arab cultural histories. So just to move on to quick outline of my paper. First of all, I will just go through the text of my doctoral research on Arab women's feminism, then some of the challenges I've encountered, third, accessibility and inaccessibility of sources, as well as my translation methodology. And finally, some of my teaching practices and ways of decolonizing Victorian studies using our knowledge of Arab and Muslim women. For the first element, which is the context of my doctoral research, my research investigates the emergence of the new woman figure in Britain and the Arab world at the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries, and cultural transformations that brought the phenomenon to prominence in both contexts around the same historical moment. This argument directly challenges the common perceptions held regarding the appearance of the Arab woman during the second half of the 20th century, and traces the origins of the phenomenon back to the fin de siècle. The latter was significant in both cultural contexts, for it witnessed a transition from Victorian to the modern in Britain, and tensions of the Arab Renaissance or the Nahda in the Arab world. The transitional nature of the 1880s and 90s is well documented in the debates of the periodical press and literary production of the period. And just as you can see on the screen, these are some of the periodical press, journals, and newspapers that I refer to. The first one is Al-Fatah, the Young Woman. It was the first one established and edited by a woman, but Al-Hilal, the Crescent, and Al-Muqtataf, the Select, these were very popular during the 80s, 1890s in the Arab world, but they were, they contained articles on science, literature, women's rights, etc., etc. So they were more broad in their scope. My research, as I said, focuses on the Arab New Woman and the cultural anxieties linked with the newness of this figure. Progressive modes of thinking were rising during the second half of the 19th century, and Muslim and Christian reformers were associated with a multitude of influences. The references to the cultural transformations happening in Britain stand out in particular. Narrative fiction and polemic writing were employed as means to deal with the woman question, and feminist literature drew different reactions from readers from all social classes, but especially from the middle class or the middle classes in the Middle East. The feminist interventions I explore in my research are especially related to the Middle East region, with some reference to the diasporic Arab literature, as I said, especially in North America. The comparative approach, comparative literature, and integration of the British New Woman, along with discourse analysis of primary and secondary sources, aim to enrich the scholarship on pioneering Arab feminist literature, especially that which was produced by women writers at the fin du siècle and early 20th century. Now, just to quickly situate my own research within the Nahda movement, the Nahda, which is also known as the Arab Enlightenment, Renaissance, or Awakening, these are all possible translations. The movement grew rapidly and was promoted by both Muslim and Christian Arabs. Scholar Abdallah Al-Urwi defines the Arab Nahda as you can see on the screen, a vast political and cultural movement that dominated the period of 1850 to 1914. Originating in Syria and flowering in Egypt, the Nahda sought through translation and vulgarization to assimilate the great achievements of modern European civilization, while at the same time reviving the classical Arab culture that antedated the centuries of decadence and foreign domination. Although Al-Urwi here emphasizes the influence of Western civilization on the Nahda movement, many critics like Nawar al-Hassan Ghuli and Abdulrazak Patel in particular argue for the indigenous origins of the movement. Now, moving on to the second aspect in our outline. In the earlier stages of my PhD, I used to start my conference papers and discussions with my peers and more senior academics in Western academia, especially in the UK, by assurance that feminism is relevant to the Arab world and to Muslims. Although my own research deals with both Muslim and Christian women writers, and at times Muslim women were more vehement in their defense of women's rights, of suffrage or the right to vote, marriage, and divorce reform. I'll just give a quick example here. You can see on the left of the screen, Hannah Kasbani Kaurani, and on the right, Zainab Fawaz. So Kaurani was a Syrian Christian woman. Zainab Fawaz was a Muslim woman writer. She belonged to the working classes. She was not typically middle class like other women writers, but Hannah Kaurani was Christian, but she, most of the time, she was attacking Fawaz's views on women's rights. Zainab Fawaz was writing from Sharia or Islamic point of view, saying that Islam gave women their rights, but Hannah Kaurani was writing against her. And just an example of that writing from the periodical press, Hannah Kaurani, in her article, Women and Politics, which was published in the journal Lebanon in 1891, she writes that homemaking as a way of life is a natural one for women, which they cannot properly overstep, since it is a path of conduct marked out for them by God. And if women exceed this path, the system of the universe will be altered and the laws of nature will be transformed. Try to compare and contrast this with what Zainab Fawaz writes in her article, Fair and Equal Treatment, which was published in An-Nil newspaper, the Nile, in 1892. Fawaz writes, the intelligent person who inquires into the affairs of this world finds the two sexes equal. Also, woman was not created in order to remain within the household sphere, never to emerge. I do not charge the women of England with wrongdoing for involving themselves in political affairs and demanding the right to participate in elections. She's focusing especially on suffrage here, or the right to vote. And finally, why should women not demand employment in politics just as she works in commerce, manufacturing, and other spheres needed by the human being in this earthly life? So you can see here that Zainab Fawaz goes as far as to say that women should be allowed in the public sphere and should not be restricted to the private sphere, that is the home. Moving on now to more challenges that I face, just to give two examples of these. A Western expert on Arab literature dismissed the validity of my research as, according to them, Arab women's fin de siècle novels were not real novels. Here, there was some kind of policing the idea of what genre should be, what narrative fiction should be, what the novel should be. Also, discussions often held the writing or Arab feminism from the 19th century to 21st century standards, rather than the Victorian ones, which were prevalent at the same time. That's why evaluations are often harder for Arab feminism. I was aided, however, by the support from my supervisors and the findings of my actual research that I was conducting at the time. For the third element now on accessibility of sources and translation methodology, for accessing the Arabic works of narrative fiction, and I analyzed in my research, locating the archives was not always a straightforward process. The difficulties I have encountered range from missing novels like pioneering women writers and critics refer to in their press articles in the early decades of the 20th century, but can no longer be located anywhere, to out-of-print novels with rare copies in far locations. It was impossible to obtain copies of certain novels, although I made considerable effort trying to locate them. Examples of these are Hasna Salonika, or Hasna Salonik, Beauty of Salonika by Labiba Mikhail Sawaya, Bain Arshain, Between Two Thrones by Farida Atiya. Also, Afifa Karam's novels, two of them, Fatima al-Badwiya, Fatima the Bedouin, and Ghadat Amshit, the Maiden of Amshit. The difficulty of locating pioneering Arabic fiction is not unique to my own research. The literature available on early Arabic narrative fiction acknowledges the existence of these novels and the ongoing challenge scholars meet when they attempt to look for them. For the novels I actually study in my thesis, I have located a copy of Zainab Fawaz's Husn al-Awaqib because Zainab Fawaz, the one you see on the screen, also wrote narrative fiction. She wrote a novel, Husn al-Awaqib, in 1899. I was able to locate a copy at the Center of Excellence for Jordanian Public University Library System. As I was not able to get access to this book through the interlibrary loan system, I contacted a friend of mine who was a doctoral student in Jordan, and their institution, the University of Jordan, kindly provided access to the novel. Also, Hindawi Foundation, not-for-profit foundation, has been crucial in locating and accessing digital copies of pioneering Arabic narrative fiction. They digitized Afifa Karam's Badi'a wa Fu'ad, the novel, in 2018, and I was able to, and that gave me a more relevant novel to the scope of my thesis. Alice Boutros al-Bustani's Riwaya Saiba, the story of Saiba, which was published in 1891. I was not able to locate a copy, but then a leading scholar in Arab studies signposted me to a copy in Berlin. After considerable time of going through the interlibrary loan system, which would have given me very limited access to the novel, The librarian at the Berlin State Library was exceptionally generous and sent me a digital copy. This journey highlights the importance of both reviewing systems of access to resources in Arabic and across the disciplines, of course, and the generosity and support of individuals with access to primary sources and rare materials. Moving on now to my translation methodology, these primary sources that I'm talking about, just checking that I'm still, can you still hear me, please?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So as I said, the primary sources I've been talking about are in Arabic mostly, and I had to come up with my own translation methodology in order to provide synopses and close readings of these novels and short stories. I developed my own translation methodology according to the nature of the text I was translating. As such, although I have mostly relied on translations that are as literal as possible to convey the intended meaning in the original Arabic text, I aim to preserve the aesthetics found in narrative fiction as well. The texts that I read in Arabic and provided my translations for, as I said, are predominantly those of narrative fiction. What was very helpful was reading articles that appeared in the Arabic press of the 19th century. For example, these articles from Zainab Fawaz, from Hannah Korania and others. I was trying to read them and see the language that was prevalent at the time, Arabic language, and then I was trying to translate those into English. Expressions, for example, like حقوق المرأة, women's rights, المساواة بين المرأة والرجل, equality between women and men, استعباد المرأة, subjection of women, and حق الانتخاب, suffrage or the right to vote, were employed by both proponents and opponents of women's rights at the time. Moving on to the last element now, teaching practice and ways to decolonize Victorian studies. This is basically related to my teaching experience of teaching Victorians Unbound and the Literary Globe. These are two compulsory undergraduate modules, which I taught at Bishop Christ's University in the UK, and Gender Identity and Modernity in the Middle East, which I taught at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. When I started teaching, there was an awareness in the classroom of the significance of me being a Muslim woman of color, teaching in a predominantly white institution. And on top of this, teaching the Victorians module, for instance, which was basically taught by Western scholars. So for my first lecture for the Victorians module, I started by asking my students whether the 19th century was a time of progress and what progress entailed in their views. Also progress for who exactly? Their answers were mostly centered on technological advancement and social reform in Britain. I then asked them ask them about the expansion of the British Empire and how global trade figure into this progress. I asked about the workers in India and enslaved people in the plantations in South America and their role in achieving this progress for Britain. The initial discussions in my seminars were by no means easy. And because my students did not know me, I had to reiterate that our classroom was a safe space for learning and unlearning and for respectful and thought-provoking dialogue. Over time, I had very positive results and improvement, especially in relation to The Woman of Color, A Tale. This is a novel that was published in 1808 anonymously, and my students were engaging with Orientalism, with the empire as well. And my students then explored issues of race and Orientalism in their two assignments set for the Victorians module, which were creative posters and essays. I had
one more minute. Yes, one more minute.
Sure. I'm closing now. Just to say that my impact as a lecturer was not limited to these areas, but also touched on classic British texts like Jane Eyre. I was trying to give them more information about the New Woman, about my own research, about Muslim women's writing as well, and the engagement from my students was quite amazing. It was just one way for me to try to decolonize Victorian studies in the UK. Thank you so much for the invite again, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Asma. Char, interested, bringing the classic one, we can learn the colonizing narrative. And the second speaker is Asnul Insani Johar. Time is yours, Ms. Asnul.
Yes, thank you, Agus. Ya, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yeah, before I start my speech, I'm just wondering if there anyone familiar with this. I just choose one novel for my speech today rather than 3 or 5 to make easier for you to understand my standpoint. So I will share this novel. I'm wondering how many of you familiar with this novel. You can chat box or raise your hand, and how many of you yes, just say yes, so I can understand how many of you familiar with Mohja Kaf. The title is The Girl in the Tangerine Scarf. So I can see in the chat box. So not many of you familiar with Mohja Kaf. So Mohja Kaf is Syrian American. So she migrated to US when she was 5 years old because of Syrian totalitarian rulers at the time, Bashar al-Assad. So they migrated to US. And then in the story, almost the same reflect with the Mohja Kaf life. So Mohja Kaf is a professor in Arkansas University. So she wrote about 7 novels, included the poetry collection. And Mohja Kaf, until now still a productive writer and professor. And The Girl in the Tangerine Scarf tell the story about Kadra. The protagonist name is Kadra. So Kadra also migrated to US when she was 5 years old with her 2 brothers. She is in the middle with her father. So they migrated to Indiana at the time, and her father worked as chapter to imam in Dawah Center. So Kadra spent her life in the Dawah Center. So this is how the struggle of Kadra at the time, like Bildungsroman. So the story about Kadra, 5 years old until a teenager, and then the adult, and she became a photographer. And so this is the story about the struggle of the family, the Shemi family, as a migrant in the US, Indianapolis. So my point is, I start with the problem. We can see the problem now, and also why the goal of our MELA conference and also our MELA Association, Muslim English Literary Association, start from the problem. Although Edward Said published more than 5 decades ago, but still relevant until today, because we can see that the way that the Westerners or the Orientalists tend to project Islam as a backward oppression, violence, in order to make them better, in order to make them Europe as modernity, creativity, modern, and democracy, and then all the opposite of this positive side projected to Islam or non-Western. This is to make them good and maintain their supremacy. Although it is difficult for us to challenge this Orientalist perspective, but still we can still use literary texts. We can still use, that's why we are important as literary scholars, so we can undermine this Orientalist, and also now published with the Western liberalism, which also tend to exclude Islam from the idea of democracy, creativity, and liberty. So this is based on this problem. I investigate some Muslim woman writer, U.S. Muslim woman, for example, Mohja Kaf, Randa Jarrar, and also Laila Halabi, and some more names. They are emerged now since the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. But for today's topic, my focus is The Girl in Tangerine Scarf, because after I read this novel, I can see that the way Mohja Kaf, the writer, tried to undermine the idea of Orientalist perspective, tend to represent Muslimah as passive and uneducated by using Islamic sacred texts. So, for example, I can give you 7 surat that Mohja Kaf discussed in her novel. First is Surat Al-Imran, Surat Jumu'ah, and also Surat At-Taubah. And there are some more, so I focus about 7 surat from the Quran in my paper, and also some hadiths, and also allude to our grandfather poet like Gibran and also Rumi. So, for example, I can, I can start it. So historically, Orientalism has perceived Islam in reductionist views for centuries. To resist the basic view, it is important to investigate Mohja Kaf, The Girl in Tangerine Scarf, which utilizes Islamic sacred texts in her literary text. So in doing so, Kaf text question Orientalists which tend to misrepresent Muslims in a basic way. Mohja Kaf uses Islamic sacred texts in her novel by focusing on, specifically, I found that Arabic term, for example, jihad, hijrah, and caliph, so which have degraded their meanings in Orientalism. So by engaging with postcolonial studies and Islamic studies, this project investigates how Mohja Kaf uses Quran and Hadith in her novel to question Western liberalism, which tends to exclude Islam from the idea of democracy, modernity, and creativity to make Western better as promoting individual rights and freedom. Some of the Islamic sacred texts inspire Muslims about the idea of jihad, hijrah, and caliph, which can be used to promote the idea of liberalism. So here, what I mean liberalism is an ideology that develops women's rights, civil liberty, democracy, creativity, and tolerance. So this project reveals how Kaf novel accommodates the idea of jihad, hijrah, and caliph, which encourage Muslims how to live in tolerance and mutual understanding as the Quran and Hadith have advocated for centuries. So however, this inspiration or these ideas is often excluded or somehow attached to the ideas of terrorism and violence, as the media, US media is often misrepresented to maintain white supremacy. So this is why my research is important to focus how this writer, Mohja Kaf, rewrite Islam from within to contest with this Western limitation and Western liberalism. So at the beginning of the novel, at her chapters, Kaf quotes Quran Surat At-Taubah, Surat 9, Ayat 21, quote, so go forth lightly and heavily and strive with your wealth and yourselves in the path of God, in the path of Allah. That's this is best for you if you know that, end quote. So in the Tafsir Nabawi or exegesis, this surat explains that Allah will grant Muslims His grace and His blessing and provide them with heaven if they perform jihad or follows Allah's way and continue hijrah or migration or moving from one place to another to find God's path. Historically, hijrah is defined as a journey of the Prophet Muhammad SAW from Mecca to Medina when Islam first emerged in 622. So this year also defined as the epoch of the year of Hijriah. Relevantly, this verse tells Muslims how to cope with the difficulties of living in the US by spending their wealth and efforts in God's way. So if Muslims spend their money and their wealth in Allah's path, including building masjid and building mosques and feeding the poor and orphans, Muslims consider performing jihad, which is misunderstood in Orientalist debates that tend to associate the word jihad with war and violence. Thus, by alluding to Quran Surah Al-Taubah ayat 22, Kaf novel undermines the Orientalist misconception, which tend to define Arabic terms, in this case jihad, in a very, very limited way. As Joseph Massad in 2015 argued that some of the new meanings, quote, some of the new meanings and reference of Islam had a significant impact on political and social thought, as well as on national and international politics in the 19th and 20th centuries. So these Islamic names, including jihad, has been attached to the idea of terrorism and killer in Orientalist debates. The Kaf novel needs to explore the term jihad, including by quoting the Quran, Surat At-Taubah 21, which discusses the idea of jihad to contest Orientalism by redefining jihad as, quote, striving yourself in the path of Allah, end quote. So the idea of hijrah, jihad, can be linked to the journey of the Prophet Muhammad SAW, who migrated from Mecca to Medina in 7th century. So this process of moving on is considered better for Muslims. If they are stuck on one problem, they should migrate to find a better place. Simultaneously, Qadra's father, Wajdi, also keeps moving on and do hijrah and jihad, hijrah from Syria during the civil war period under the Bashar al-Assad regime to foreign land, the US, and from the Rocky Mountain, the crossroad of America, Indiana. So when Qadra, Shami, and her elder brother, Ayat Shami, were 7 and 9 years old, Wajdi tries to find a new job in Hosier's land as a chapter coordinator, Dawah Center, to stay on Allah's path and practice the real jihad, which give his wealth and effort in Dawah Center as an imam or chapter coordinator. However, living as a Muslim in the US is not easy for Wajdi and Shami family, especially after US invasion of Iraq in 2003. Although the setting of the novel is in 1970s, this novel is still relevant nowadays as US Muslims are still struggling to live in the US. This condition can be linked to Edward Said Orientalism, 1978, which is still connected to the current situation, as we can see that how the Orientalist debates about jihad and hijrah remain detached to the idea of terrorism and violence. For example, if you check now the Oxford English Dictionary, or ED, defines jihad as, quote, religious war of Muslim against unbelievers, inculcated as a duty by the Quran and tradition. So this here OED claims jihad as a Muslim religious war to fight against non-believers. Thus OED needs to renew this definition, since it defines this term is in a very old-fashioned way. So unlike OED or Oxford English Dictionary, CAF originally defined jihad as, quote, go wherever in the country where there are Muslims who wanted to learn Islam better, to teach to their children, to build mosques, to help to suffer Muslim in other countries, and to find solution to how living in kafir land made practicing Islam hard, end quote. So this definition contested the Oxford English Dictionary, which defined jihad a very old-fashioned way, in a very basic way, as a religious war, terror, which tends to associate the jihad with radical groups, violence, and terrorism, instead of helping Muslims who are suffering while living in a foreign land, as Kaf discussed in her novel that I gave example before. So by depicting her character, feel free to practice Islam or worship in public life, this text questions Western liberalism, which mainly define liberalism as protecting individual life as private. However, in Kaf novel, the Shami family make their individual life become public by praying in the public to question US individualism, which is often private and kafir. In this sense, Islam accommodates the idea of liberalism, in this case promoting individual rights, by letting individual has freedom to practice Islam everywhere, including in the public life, instead of private as Western liberalism is often protected. So this is somehow example how Kaf text undermine the idea of Western liberalism by depicting her Muslim characters have their own freedom both privately and publicly. So I think that's all my presentation. I hope we can raise some questions so we can discuss more about how we should work together to question or undermine Orientalist perspective or also Western liberalism, which tend to project Islam with the backward and oppression and violence. I think that's all. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Ms. Asnul. Interesting that Mojakkab tried to construct Islam value and meet with Western value. Okay, because both of a speaker talking about the power of Mama in Bahasa, women power, I invite to the participant to discuss to the what the presented by the speakers. Raise your hand and then what's your questions? Ms. Asma, colonizing narrative you present, you mean like encounter and or eliminating to the Arab woman's role in the early 20th century or something like what?
Thank you, first, but could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, the colonizing narrative, I just remember in Indonesia currently going to general election where one of polar is polar, encounter another polar with encounter narrative. It look like something like that or look like what? It's clear enough?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So basically, I was trying to refer to both authors that you've seen during the presentation, Kaurani and Zainab Fawaz. Both of them were very interested in writing about women's rights, first from their point of view as Arab women, but they were referring to the women of England. We know during the end of the 19th century and early 20th century, there was so much work and reform going on regarding who had the right to vote. And of course, women didn't have the right to vote in Britain until, was it 1918? But before that, even Arab women were trying to debate this. But Zainab Fawaz was of the view that, okay, women should be given a say in political life, but Kaurani didn't believe so until she traveled to the US. She was given different talks there, and she was in what I think is an Orientalist way of thinking. She was changing her way of thinking, and she was saying, okay, Eastern women are backward. We have to take American women as an example, etc., etc. So that was a very interesting debate. But Zainab Fawaz, from the very beginning, was just very vocal because she was basing all her discourse on an Islamic view and attitude on what women's rights should look like. I hope this answers your question, but if not, do let me know, please.
Yeah, something eliminating or trying to cover with another. Okay, Ms. Asnul, Mojakkab began his written the novel with some verses of Holy Quran. How I just want to know how to respond the reader, because the target reader are not only Muslim, right? What about the response among the Western when Mojakkab write it with some verse in Holy Quran?
Oh yeah. So this text, this novel also used by some in post-colonial studies in the US. So they like it because they understand that what does it mean, the jihad actually according to Muslim perspective, and also according to Quran. So I think they enjoy, they like, they really express this novel. Especially this novel also has been awarded as Arab American Award. So this is how they like it and appreciate this novel, even though they are not Muslim.
So yeah, don't have to worry, everyone. I want to begin with inductively with some verse in our Holy Quran. Is there or are there any question? There is from Khairul Fuad. What is Mahjaris in Gibran's period impact to this movement, especially women movement in Middle East? Question for Ibu Hasnul.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Pak Gus?
What is Mahjaris in Gibran's period impact to this movement, especially women movement in Middle East?
So the question is what the poems
the period, yeah, Gibran's period impact to this movement.
I think Gibran is about 1,000, right? 1,000 years old at the time. So Gibran really inspires some of U.S. Muslimah writers, and this is how they admire Gibran, through the way they tend to quote some Gibran poems in their literary works.
Yeah, Pak Hairul.
Did I answer your question, Pak Hairul? Or you can raise your.
Thank you.
You can speak here, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think hijrah ya. Hijrah is very significant for change ya. Like I think Mahjaris ni the word come from hijrah ya. Hijrah. So hijrah is very important for change situation. I think.
I see.
Okay. Mahjaris is a community, not only Gibran ya, not only Gibran.
Yeah.
Mahjaris is a community
yes.
of writer from Middle East, immigrant to United States ya. And
to the US.
US.
Yeah, it's really important point. Thank you, Pak Hairul. Yeah, I can add it. This is how the idea of hijrah in this novel. We can see that through the quote from Gibran. Gibran also write some poem about hijrah, and he wrote also in 1,000 Hijriyah at the time. Thank you, Pak. Yeah, Pak Hairul.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pak Hairul.
Thank you.
Anyone? Any others? Okay. Ms. Asma want to discuss? Okay.
Yes, thank you so much, Khairul, for this question. Just to say that although I'm not focusing on hijrah myself, but the Mahjaris in North America, they were part of that immigration wave that happened in the 1880s and 1890s, the end of the 19th century and early 20th century. Their writing was very impactful for women writers, especially Gibran. We know that he impacted so many writers, both in Mahjar in the US and in the Middle East as well. So many people just use his writing as a reference for them, but his writing was not quite Muslim in this sense. He just promoted himself as someone with a humanistic approach, just in a very neutral way, just focusing on human rights. So I can see his relevance to my paper and that of Hasnul as well. The Mahjaris did have a great impact on women's writing, both in the Middle East and in the diaspora as well.
Okay, so with a big impact, yeah. Okay, the participant, if we look at the schedule, our schedule is 10 to 4, and now 6 to 4. I think the time is over for our discussion for the second main session. Ms. Asma, you want to give a closing statement or something?
I would just mainly say thank you so much again for the invite, and this was an amazing opportunity for me, and I hope for other participants as well, to see what kinds of research are happening in Muslim women's literature and in Muslim English literature as well. I think it can be very easy to drop from what's going on in current research, but this was a very good way of keeping in touch with everyone in the field. So thank you so much. I look forward to hearing from you if there are any other events, similar events happening soon. So thank you so much.
So much. Thank you so much, Ms. Asma. So, we as a Muslim, I think, to be what delegate or someone who have to yelling or to the Muslim literature. So let's close this. Oh, Ms. Asnul, you have a closing statement?
Yeah, I think that's, I just want to encourage you again to join our MELA, Muslim English Literary Association, in order to work together as Muslim, our sisterhood and our brotherhood, in order to question this Western liberalism that we stand to project Islam as a violence and oppression. So this is one way to do that. We work together how to undermine the stereotype about Muslim in the Western world. I think that's all, and I hope see you again in our MELA forum in end of September, and also next year our third MELA international conference. So I hope you will join us again, and thank you so much. So happy to see you all here. Yeah, assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, Ms. Asnul. Okay, so participants, all the end of our conference today. Thank you so much for all the speaker and all the participants and all the committee. So much thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Asma.
Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Miss Asma.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Time
Thank you.
is your
Ladies
master
and-
ceremony.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Agus Suryadi. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and esteemed participants. As we come to the end of this enlightening journey, I stand before you today with gratitude and inspiration. The International Conference on Muslim English Literature 2023 has truly been a remarkable gathering where ideas, perspectives, and cultures converge to celebrate the power of words. Over the past few hours, we have witnessed the transformative influence. We have witnessed the transformative influence of literature in bridging divides, fostering understanding, and embracing diversity. Our esteemed speakers and scholars have shared their profound insights, unveiling the richness and depth of Muslim English literature. We have explored the nuances of storytelling, the power of narratives, and the universal resonance of the human experience. As we depart from this gathering, Let us carry forward the spirit of this conference, incorporating the knowledge gained into our own work, studies, and personal lives. Let us strive to amplify the voices of Muslim English literature, ensuring its prominence and recognition in the global literary landscape. I extend my deepest gratitude to our keynote speakers, esteemed presenters, organizers, and volunteers whose dedication and tireless efforts made this conference a resounding success. Their commitment to advancing the field of Muslim English literature has left an indelible mark on our collective consciousness. And finally, I want to express my heartfelt appreciation to each and every one of you, the attendees. Your presence here today is a testament to your passion for literature and your unwavering commitment to fostering cross-cultural dialogue. It is through gatherings like these that we pave the way for a brighter, more inclusive future, one that celebrates the beauty of diversity and the power of language. Before we close, I was hoping we could take a quick virtual picture together. So to all participants and presenters, if you can, kindly switch on your cameras so we can take a virtual picture together. Kindly to all participants, presenters, speakers, committees, volunteers, please switch on your camera and we will take a virtual picture together. Okay. Let us give them 1 minute and then we will take the picture. Okay. It seems once again, for those who would like to join the virtual picture together of the Muslim English Literature 2023 International Conference, kindly switch on your camera so we can take a virtual picture together. Okay, I think it's enough. Okay, I will lead the picture. Okay, everyone, please give us your brightest smiles. Okay. The first slide of my view, okay? 3, 2, 1. Okay, now the second slide. Once again, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much to all participants, speakers, presenters for your cooperation. And as we part ways, let us remember the words of Rumi, who beautifully said, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself." Let us embrace the wisdom gained from this conference and carry it within us, embracing change and becoming ambassadors of unity and understanding. Thank you all for being part of this extraordinary journey. Until we meet again. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi.
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Hi, excuse me, I have a query. I'm Dr.
Yes.
Shah. When will the certificates be issued?
It will be sent by Monday.
Monday. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, well.
Thank you so much, all the committee, for your work hard. So happy to you all, so proud of you, all the volunteer too. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Amen.